thank you guys all today for coming for our board-to-board interview with our good friend, Rebecca Liao. She is VP Controller of WePay, JPMorgan Chase Company, and we are very glad to have her here today. She was also the former chair of our mentorship program, which is amazing. So I love how this is all full circle now, and you're coming back to talk with us. Just as a reminder, this event is recorded. If you have any questions, feel free to use the chat box. Raise your hand, use gallery view for the best experience. And if you're not talking, please stay on mute, and we'll get to you as soon as possible. Just feel free to raise your hand at any time during this conversation. Again, we're trying to make this as interactive as possible. Monty Jade was founded in 1989 by immigrants from Asia. They bonded together to support one another because they were under-networked and under-resourced. Through this community, billions of dollars of enterprise value was created and hundreds of companies were formed. Even to this day, Monty Jade is focused on building community. We do this today under three main pillars. The first one are our interview series, such as this one, where we focus on celebrating notable community leaders through understanding their personal journey. We believe that understanding the personal journey helps us better connect as the next generation of leaders. The second pillar that we focus on are technology forums, in which we bring together our community to learn and understand new ideas that are evolving in the landscape. Recently, we've held talks on venture investing, AI, biosciences, machines, robotics, and to be coming up, we'll have some more on blockchain and biosciences as well. Last but most important is our mentorship program, and you guys are all part of this program. This is a 100% volunteer-run program that helps build the skill sets of future leaders. Asians are still underrepresented in many technology companies here in the Bay Area, and to this day, Asians still lag their peers in being promoted. White males continue to be promoted at 2 times the rate of Asian males, while white females are promoted at 3 times the rate of Asian females. This disparity has gotten worse over the last 2 decades, and our goal is to eliminate this bias and this discrepancy. As you all know, we are starting to open up recruiting for our next year's program. So if you know anyone that you think would be great for this program, please send them our way, and we'll love to get them in the program for next year. At this time, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Deloitte, Venture Pacific Law, UMC, Silicon Motion, New York Life, Most, and Richwave. We thank them, especially during COVID. They've really stepped up to sponsor us in a virtual world. And we always continue to thank our annual sponsors, as you can see here on the right-hand side. At this time, I get to introduce Rebecca Liao. She is VP Controller of JPMorgan, of WePay, JPMorgan Chase & Co. She's also the co-founder and director of Jezeba, which I will have her talk about a little later on. She has taken and run numerous roles as corporate controller at Credit Karma, Axient. She was CFO at Jade Sky Technologies. And she's also taken a lot of other roles, as you can see down the list. She's got a very, very deep finance and accounting background, and we love to listen to some of her stories today. Rebecca, I want to send it to your way so you can do a quick intro of yourself as well.
Okay, I'm going to share a little screen. Let's see if I can do this. So please bear with me. Oh, I can't share. I can't share.
Ryan, can you help out?
Okay. I thought picture's worth 1,000 words, so I created a little collage of who I am, and feel free to ask questions.
I'll go ahead and give it a try, Rebecca.
Great. I think I'm going to go with this one. Share. Okay, can you see my screen?
Looks great.
Okay, great. So this is me, Rebecca. So I'll start with kind of like my background, where I'm from, and I can kind of walk you through my career as well. So I was actually born in Burma. If you don't know where Burma is, it's somewhere between China and Thailand and India, so Southeast Asia country. Recently, a couple of decades ago, they changed their name to Myanmar, which just means Burma in Burmese. And this is a really iconic symbol of Burma because it's a very much a Buddhist country. I immigrated here to the United States when I was about 9, and I went to, of all places, Tennessee, and it's in red, and it is a red state, of those of you who follow election this year. So I did most of my growing up in Tennessee, and then I went off to college. When I went off to college, I went to Wellesley College. Then I did my graduate work at Bentley College. They're both in Massachusetts. Then I came out here to the wonderful land of California. I got my master's in accounting at Bentley. I was an econ major at Wellesley, and that's why I have the certified Board of Accountancy, California Board of Accountancy here. I'm a CPA. Started my career at Deloitte, and along the way, I have a family. I got married and have two wonderful girls who I cannot believe are all now in high school. My older one is a senior in high school and applying to colleges this year remotely. And I currently work for WePay. So along the way, you saw a lot of different companies I'm with. If you have any questions, let me know. And the other fun thing I did a couple of years ago was I started a nonprofit called Jezuba. So Jezuba means thank you in Burmese. So that's why this whole thing kind of is related. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, and the goal of Jezuba is to empower the next generations. And with COVID, one of the fortunate things that have happened with COVID, there are a lot of unfortunate things, but one of the fortunate things is that we're able to help a lot more people through Jezuba, one of which is the next generation, with a lot of internship drying up because a lot of the companies are scaling back, or a lot of real, in-person events were canceled. We started hosting a lot of virtual internships. So this is a picture of my team. As of the summer, we had 11 interns, and in January, we're bringing on an additional 5 interns as well. So we do a lot of interesting things, like, COVID-related stuff. You can go to the website to see, but one of which is to be able to provide solar LED lights to school children living in off-grid rural community in Burma. So again, tying back to my roots. So in a nutshell, that's who I am. Feel free to answer any questions you might have about my career or anything else.
Awesome. Thank you for that. That's amazing. A little nice picture to kind of take us through your whole life.
Yeah, pretty much.
Awesome. You want to stop sharing screen and we could just go on the video?
Yep, I sure can.
Great.
I am working with 2 screens, so sometimes it's a little tricky. Okay.
Fantastic. So I want to kick off this interview with, why did you get into accounting and finance first? What drove you down that path when you first started off?
I'm very practical. I knew I wanted to be in business. I wanted to have a core set of skills that I knew that I would be very good at. I'm actually really shy. Like growing up, I was extremely shy. It didn't help that I grew up in Tennessee, so I stood out like sore thumb. So I thought, I took my accounting class and loved it. I know, I love accounting. I understood debits and credit. I understood the theories, and I was like, this is a great way to break into the world of business. And accounting is basically the language of business. So through it, it has opened a lot of doors for me, and I'm very appreciative of it.
And so when you first graduated, you started your career off in Deloitte, you said, right?
Yes. So I had this big dream that, I wanted to get my master. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go for it.
Sorry, the connection's not very good. Oh, I think you were asking me about starting off my career at Deloitte. So I went in to get my master's in accounting because I wanted to be a CPA. I wanted to be in Big Four. Well, at the time it was Big Six. A couple of mergers happened since. And I thought, I'll be on the partnership track, and started off at Deloitte. All of that went really smoothly, except that a year into Deloitte, I realized I did not like public accounting. I don't like the culture. I don't like the lifestyle. And so I had to pivot. Yeah, but the good thing was I was in Silicon Valley by then. So pivoting in Silicon Valley as a finance person was pretty smooth. It didn't feel like it at the time because I was, very young, but it actually was quite smooth.
So I'm curious, what part of public accounting did you not like?
I think it kind of goes back to me being really shy again, is I was brought up with, work hard, meritocracy, right? You work hard, people will recognize you've done a great job and you'll get promoted. In public accounting, even at that level, entry level, you really kind of have to network, right? Like if you keep on working hard, you'll just break and burn out really fast. So I was on client after client where I'm like driving all around the Bay Area in bad traffic, working 60 hours a week, getting paid so little. Like my friends who were, went into non-public accounting were making like 40% more. So I felt like a total idiot. So, and when you're working that hard, you can't really think straight, your body start breaking down. And so it was just not a very good thing. So it was very hard for me at the time because I felt like such a loser, right? I went in to get my master's in accounting just so that I can be a CPA. And so like I couldn't see around the bend. But once I was able to kind of work through that, it actually was a really good thing because it opened up a totally different world for me, and was able to kind of, take advantage of and learn a lot more about business than I would if I was just in public accounting.
So from public accounting, you hated it. How did you like decide to move? Like, there's so many companies that you could have gone to. Like, what was that kind of like that frame of mind that you were going to as you were making that approach?
Well, again, I was very practical. Any company that wanted to hire me, I was going to give it a try. But I was really targeting software company at the time. It was in the 90s. And the reason for it was I started developing what's called repetitive stress syndrome, which is, a lot of programmers get like carpal tunnel. So repetitive syndrome is not so much like the nerve damage, but it was more sort of the tendons damage. So part of the issue was that I was in a lot of pain. So working in public accounting was terrible because I keep on having to move from client to client, and having ergonomic workspace was extremely difficult. And back in the 90s, people didn't really know about carpal tunnel or repetitive stress syndrome, and they don't associate it with accountants, they associate it with engineers. So I thought I'm going to go to a software company because they hire a lot of software engineers, so they know what this is. And it really did help because once I was able to get my own desk and my own workspace, a lot of the pain I was experiencing went away. And when that goes away, a lot more, the world kind of opens up.
Definitely. So, yeah. Through your first non-CPA job or public accounting job, what did you learn? Like, what were some of the skills that you started to build there? What did you learn about yourself through that first job?
Yeah. I think very early on, what I learned was it wasn't just the hard work that was going to get me, get me ahead, get me to where I wanted to go. I really kind of had to make my own path. And I did not learn this part until much later on. And this part is especially because I'm an Asian woman. People don't, people have this impression that, you'll get spotted for being this great worker. But in reality, it's like, if you don't ask for what you deserve, you will not get it. So that's what I learned really early on. And fortunately or unfortunately, that took me through like a lot of, kind of windy path through my career, right? Meaning that I joined a lot of different companies. So the good thing is I have a broad set of experience all related to accounting finance. And because I was in accounting, accounting is similar to any type of business, but that was kind of like the journey I had to kind of take to get to where I wanted to go.
So I know you went through, to your point, like a lot of different companies. What was some of the motivations going from company to company to company? Like, was it opportunistic? Were you running towards something? Were you running away from something? What was going on in your mind as you kind of made these moves?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of all of those. So early on, I was kind of working towards something, right? Like I really, what happened was, so after Deloitte, I joined Symantec, and I was reporting to this person where I was probably a little snooty at the time. I was in my 20s, and I was like, darn, I feel like I can do better than this person that I'm reporting to. I definitely work harder than her, and I have, better education. And so I didn't really have as much respect. So my goal was that I wanted to kind of surpass that. So I moved to a role of like manager. So I became a manager at a very young age, and mainly because I was like, I know I can do this. So from there on, you know, I was like, oh, this is pretty easy. I kind of understand this. I want to be a controller. So that's kind of like what drove me there. There's some, you know, jobs I took because I was really, really interested in it. One which was being a CFO of a startup company. I really, really wanted to do that. I just wanted to have the experience of being able to work at a, you know, grounds up startup company. And the tricky thing was that the CEO of the company was my husband. So it was a little bit kind of interesting dynamic. We as a family was great, but I think it was a very interesting experience. And after running the company for about 5 years, we wound down the operations, and we both kind of like went back to corporate jobs. But that was also kind of like heading toward that. So now what I'm doing is I never thought I would be working for a big bank. It kind of came about because I got into fintech, and they were specifically looking for someone of my talent, somebody who has big company experience and startup experience to help them integrate the WePay, which was a startup that JPMC had purchased. So they wanted to integrate that. As a big bank has a lot of regulation controls. So they really needed someone with kind of my background. So I kind of like found a really nice home. So that was more of, you know, finding a really good fit.
That's great. I want to kind of jump back to you joining a startup, namely your husband's startup. I know you guys work together pretty closely. So what is that like?
Yeah. Well, you know, work life was really, really good. Like I never had to make excuse when I had to go pick up my kids because, you know, he understood if I didn't do it, he would have to do it. So my kids were pretty young at the time. So I'm thinking back, this was about what, 7 or 8 years ago. So my kids were like 10 and 8 at the time. So it worked really well for work-life balance. It was stressful in the sense that, you know, as the founder, being married to the founder CEO, everything, especially as a startup, everything kind of rolled up to him. And as the CFO, kind of supporting him on everything else that is non-technical, everything kind of rolled back down to me. So, I mean, at the time, we handled it really well. I think our marriage experienced a lot of growth from there, but looking back, it was pretty stressful. And looking back now, I think that's one of the reasons why we're so appreciative of where we are. It's like a lot of those stress that we were living in day to day just kind of went away, and we're like, oh, okay, this is kind of more normal. But at the time, you know, it was actually, you know, created a lot of flexibility, which we like. And I think the people who work with us or work for us were, you know, we had about 15 employees at a time at one point. So I think they were all fine with it, but you would have to ask them. Right. That's my perspective. I think we were all fine with it. But, yeah.
I find this very interesting because, like, you know, these like husband, wife or wife, husband kind of combo businesses, either it makes or breaks the marriage. I often see, right? So like, it's great that you guys found a better path forward and were able to build on your communication. Now that you're at a larger company, what's some of the big kind of like learning lessons that you've had now?
Yeah. So I think my startup experience really helped me to cope with being in a large company. Either that or it's just, you know, more experience and age. But specifically, the things that helps me cope with it are like, I don't take certain things for granted, right? For example, at JPMC, there's a lot of different people, right? And they have really, really deep scope. When I was a startup, I was it. Like, I was like, if I don't know something, I have to go out and find that expertise and try to figure it out, you know, whether it's like, right, I have all this expertise, right? So I have all those resources that I can already leverage. But the part that really helps me with my startup experience is that I'm used to like people telling me no I'm used to having to dig more to find the answer. So at JPMC is perfect because I'm like, yeah, I can do this, except, I don't have to worry about budget. I don't have to worry about, whether it's getting approved or not. It's just a matter of finding the right person to kind of give me that very specialized, advice. So from that perspective, it's been really good. Whereas I find a lot of my colleagues who just like have a startup experience get really frustrated because they just look at it as bureaucracy. I look at it as there is bureaucracy, but there is also a lot of those resources out there.
Definitely, that's kind of like the umbrella that kind of protects you, right, on an ongoing basis.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. We've got a question from Karina. Karina, you want to ask your question live? Why don't you ask your question live?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Rebecca. So, I am a program manager right now, and I just finished my 2-year MBA. Mm-hmm. I feel finance is very interesting, but I don't have a finance work experience. I just like it when I started in school. Mm-hmm. If I want to switch to a role more towards finance role, do you get any suggestion for me?
So if you want to kind of break into finance, but you don't specifically have finance background, my suggestion would be kind of to look at more like financial analysis or like in the FP&A team. Don't go into accounting. So there's from my perspective, there's two paths into finance, right? There's two paths within finance. I always tell, like, disclosure, I'm an accountant, I'm a CPA, so I'm very accounting focused. So I kind of started with accounting and kind of built up into finance. So if you don't particularly have that background, I would say kind of come in from a finance perspective, like understanding, like bigger picture, right? Doing analysis from a bigger picture, like how the business is growing or not growing, understanding P&L and how that kind of ties into balance sheet and cash flow. So kind of understanding from that perspective, and maybe even like pivoting to like a financial analyst role, which is a lot more like in any company in the Bay Area would be very Excel intensive, understanding certain softwares, right? ERP system to be able to kind of understand how the ratios and things like that analysis, right? So I think that would probably be the most appropriate for you, especially because you have an MBA background.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, sure.
I wanted to ask this question around raising kids through your career. I think that's a very tough question, especially with a lot of women. And any kind of comments or struggles that you faced as you were juggling your career and your kids?
Oh yeah, lots. I'm really happy my girls are in high school now because they're a lot more independent. I went through a phase. So I had my child in my 30s. So that, I thought it was kind of late, but by a lot of standards these days, I guess it's not that late. But it was a really big shift. But first of all, both my husband and I really wanted kids, so we tried really hard. But when we had kids, it was a huge shift in our lifestyle that we just, I can't even say that we didn't expect it. It was just such a shift. Like we didn't have any freedom anymore because the kids just really needed a lot of constant care. And I've always been used to kind of just working when I'm working, and I don't want to have to like go home by a certain time. When you have kids, you can't do that. Like your days are really kind of boxed in, at this time you got to drop them off at daycare. This time you got to pick them up. And if you're late, not even mentioning, the guilt of it all, but because you don't ever want to be the last parent picking up your kids from daycare, but there's also financial consequences to it. So your days are really kind of boxed in. So, so that in itself produces a lot of stress. And, as a working mom, and this is one thing I would tell, other working mom, because I didn't really have that information given to me when I became a mom. Don't feel so guilty. It's just a waste of your time. I felt so guilty for putting my kids in daycare. And it took me quite a bit of time to kind of really admit that I actually really enjoy working. I don't know why, but I just felt so guilty. And I think I don't know if it's just a me thing or it's an Asian women thing, but I didn't meet like, German mom. She was, and I remember her saying like, of course I work, I make too much money not to work. I'm like, why can't I have that attitude, right? Why am I straddled with so much guilt for wanting to go back to work and provide for my family? So, so that's one thing that I would, advise is that the guilt that you feel is normal, but you don't have to. It's a waste of time. You're not doing anything that needed for your own mental health. So, I did do a couple of things that were really right, which is I've always really enjoyed swimming, except for this year with COVID. I don't dare go to the public pools, so no swimming, but that really kind of helped me to get that mental, health. It's like swimming for me is like meditation, right, for other people. So I totally recommend that you have that work-life balance and carve out a time for yourself because it's very important.
That's great.
Yeah.
We have a question.
And also one more thing. Don't be afraid to ask your husband for help and be very specific on what you need him to do, because if you don't ask, he will not help. That's one thing I learned.
We got a question from Bing. Bing, you want to ask your question?
Sure. Hi, Rebecca. Thanks for joining us tonight. So
Sure.
what I understood you say was you're a pretty practical person. And I guess my question is more around, you had mentioned that, with WePay, you definitely found a comfortable spot and a good fit. So what is that perspective on coming into a defined role that you have the skill sets for versus going in and creating or potentially pitching yourself to a company and creating a role that only you have unique skill sets to bring that isn't part of the job criteria that they might be advertising for or looking for?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And I do think that I was primed in many ways when I look back to be successful at WePay because they already recognized all the holes that they had. So first of all, it was a startup that had a lot of revolving door around finance. I'm just trying to give all the public information that was out there. So they knew that when the company acquired it, that accounting finance was really lacking controls, right? So they already knew the holes. So when they brought me in, they were very we trust you, you run with it, right? So they already had a very well-defined need for it. But what I did have to do was I had to kind of go beyond that by articulating what the specific holes are and how is it that we're going to fill it, right? Because I don't think my boss and also JPMC is so big, it kind of have a matrix organization. So I had one boss, but then I dotted line to this other boss. So it's kind of like I had to really kind of manage them and keep them updated, right? So that was something that was more of creating the role of what is it that I'm going to do, because neither one of them was you're the expert, you need to do what you need to do, right? But having that well-defined need for you, that was key, because then I had a lot more of carte blanche and kind of getting support, right? Hope that answered your question.
Great. Ryan, you want to ask your question?
Sure. So during your time in the startup space, this is kind of one of my favorite questions. What would you say is your best war story? And I'm going to define a war story as basically being this extremely dramatic point where success or failure hinged on the decisions made in the next 24 hours type situation.
Yeah, it's, in startup, there's a lot of those moments. A lot of them. One of which moment was we shipped this device to our customer in Japan, and somehow FedEx screwed it up. And so we were scrambling to try to, figure out where this shipment is and how to get it back from it. And, as a startup, when you have those demos, you have one or two of, you don't have a dozen of them that you can just ship out. And being a semiconductor, you know, it's very like product. It's not like a software or, you know, or banking where there's like the product isn't really like anything you need to ship. It was really, really stressful, right? Because we felt like a lot of things would kind of hinge on it. And nothing, you know, I did in terms of like schooling or whatever kind of prepares you for things like that is just more of like working through, you know, the channel of like FedEx and trying to figure out where it is, how is it that you're going to get it, being really persuasive and say, oh, please come back and, you know, drop it off again, like even though you've already left. So it was really, that probably was one of the most stressful events. But there were a lot of things like that, you know, raising money, meeting with investors, potential investors, and then trying to get on their calendar, and then getting on their calendar was like, oh, wow, it's a great deal. But then you got to do the pitch and the whole, you know, due diligence of it. It's all stressful. And I realized I really don't like it. I really don't like that whole aspect of it, right? But it was really good to go through because I'm one of those people where, you know, I love learning new things. And that was a really, you know, great learning experience for me. Yeah.
Would you ever consider going back to another startup, maybe a later stage one, let's say Series B now or Series C, as a CFO kind of role? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I definitely would. I mean, I'm not over yet in terms of my career. I know I've said this before, I'm going to say it again. I really do enjoy working. I think it gives me a purpose. It gives me a reason to get up in the morning and kind of get the day started. Otherwise, I'll just like, I feel like I won't get to do anything. So that's one of the reasons why I kind of started Jaziba, is because I kind of get to use a lot of those entrepreneurial, you know, spirits and work with, you know, a wholly different set of people than what I do at work at a big bank where there's a lot more established processing and policy. A lot of what I do at the bank is like, does this follow policy? How can we tweak the policy to make sure we didn't break the policy? How do we, you know, do this process to fit into policy? Whereas entrepreneur, you know, you're like, what policy, what thing? I mean, how do we just get this thing off the ground? So that's kind of like my, I realized it after I started doing it, is my whole Jaziba role is. So would I consider going back to startup? Definitely. I do really enjoy a lot of aspect of startup. One of the things that I probably will insist on is to have it be a bit bigger and have more transaction, because I was at a 15-person startup. I mean, I basically did everything that was not technical, which I don't mind it because I'm that type of person. But at the same time, there were a lot of things from that, you know, I knew like technical accounting stuff that I just wasn't really using. So at the end of the day, I felt like I was kind of undervalued in that sense, right? So I think I want to have a company that already has a lot of transactions, and so then I can come in and more build the team. I really enjoy that. Put in policy and procedures. Advise on, you know, what is the best way to kind of get the business pivot to a certain business, or, you know, talk about other opportunity, investment opportunity. I think that's more well suited, but I probably would not have known that unless I was already, you know, had joined a company like Jade Sky and ended up doing everything.
Yeah, it sounds like you don't like the operating part as much as you like the finance side, and that's kind of like, right, because like at Jade Sky, it was like the operations side as opposed to the finance role.
Well, yes, I like the operating side coming from an accounting perspective. So, because right now I do a lot of operation stuff too, right? Because anytime you have a business, for example, one of the things, as you know, as you may know, I'm like trying to sift through and make sure what is public information about JPMC, because they have really a lot of rules on that. So one of the things that, you know, we have said is WePay is a small, medium business, you know, specialty for the bank, right? So the bank acquired WePay because they want to get into more small, medium businesses. And so like getting into more like in front of a lot of entrepreneurs. So with that, you know, we want to start venturing into a lot of different areas that the bank is not in is currently doing. So that in itself requires, anytime you do anything, there's a mapping out of how would accounting, handle this processing procedure. Because being 100 and some odd year old company, they have, very strict system requirement. So there's always kind of thinking through that. I enjoy more of that part of it, is what I've realized. So maybe kind of extension, operation, but extension of accounting finance.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you for the explanation. I want to ask another question around your volunteering work. I mean, you were very active in Monty Jade, right? You took over the chair role for the mentorship program. You started a nonprofit. What kind of draws you to this kind of work? And I'm very curious.
Yeah, that's a very good question. First of all, I love my time at Monty Jade. I did the I was a mentee, and then the next year I became the chair of the program. And then I think I came back, and this is when I met you, David, when I help out with Monty Jade, the parent organization, with all the fundraising and everything. So at the end of the day, I really like being part of a community. And through nonprofit work, I feel like I can do that. And especially with Jeziba, I get to work with young people, a lot of mentoring and building community and talking about what's possible. So I really enjoyed that. And also the whole giving back, not so much with Monty J, but definitely with Jeziba, is I'm really looking forward to, I mean, we had to cancel all our travel plans, but I'm really looking forward to going to Burma next year to hand out, these solar LED lamps. So we do a lot of fundraising so that we can accumulate a certain amount of funds so we can buy a pallet of, solar LED lights and go to these Mercy villages and distribute them. So it's one of our, on our bucket list to do. And I'm hoping to be able to do that as a family. And also we mentioned to some friends, so they're also interested. So just being able to kind of be in a position to give forward, pay forward. So I really enjoyed that. And it also kind of being practical also makes a lot of the pain and that I've kind of gone through my life a bit more worth it, because I was like, well, other people get to benefit from it. So it wasn't so painful, right?
Definitely. I'm a super big proponent of, volunteer and nonprofit work. I think it just stresses, in my perspective, like it trains a different skill set that you often don't get to experience in the work world. So I don't know if you could talk a little bit about what you thought you learned through kind of volunteering or organizing that you maybe not have been able to experience in a professional world.
Well, definitely through Jeziba, I've learned to have more tolerance and patience with young people because they don't really think like we do, because they just haven't had the experience, right? So they've really taught me to really kind of look at the world in a different way. So for example, we've done like a couple of these panel discussion, and I would say, just like I would to my staff, okay, this is what you do, and they run with it. Well, inevitably, when you give a task like that to people, young people who don't really have much experience, they drop out key steps like, figuring out, for example, we're going to do a Zoom meeting. Did you test the Zoom to make sure it's working right? Things like that. So the first couple of events, we kind of had a little bit of, snag, but working with them, it's like really rewarding, because by the second or third time around, they've really learned like this is part of who they are. And that is like really awesome to see, because I'm like, those are the skills you're going to need when you go into the workforce, right? And talking to them and figuring out what's important to them, because I assume that it's important to them because I'm looking at it from my perspective, but I'm always kind of very grateful to kind of see it from their perspective of how they would approach a problem, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think this idea of communicating across different spectrums of people, oh my goodness, working in a nonprofit world definitely stresses your ability to communicate, for sure.
Yeah.
There's no controls, there's no processes, there's no procedures.
Exactly.
So we need to really reiterate over and over again to really get points across, to really move the crowd.
Yeah.
We got another question from Ryan. Ryan, why don't you jump in here?
All right, sure. And everyone else, please feel free to ask questions. What is one piece of advice you'd give to someone who's transitioning from entrepreneurship to the corporate world and vice versa? Because I think that transition is actually really difficult in either direction.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand why that would be difficult, but at the end of the day, I think if you can jump into being an entrepreneur, you're kind of all set, meaning that you already have a mindset that you're willing to take risk and, you know, you're willing to try all sorts of things. So if you're going from being an entrepreneur into corporate world, kind of think of the people that you come across more as a way to kind of sell your idea or your product to, because I think that might kind of soften the blow a little bit. Less of like, oh my gosh, I have to go through this bureaucracy again, because, you know, a lot of established companies, especially banks, have so much bureaucracy. So a lot of time people get really turned off by that. So to kind of think about it from that perspective, I think that is really helpful. I think it's a little bit more of a challenge to go from being corporate to the entrepreneur if you already don't have that, right? That feeling, that fire, because there's no guardrails. You really can do anything you want and hurt yourself pretty badly. So, I think would be hard to convince you to be an entrepreneur if you already don't have that spirit. Yeah.
Great. So I want to maybe ask a question from a different dimension, which is more like maybe a self-confidence dimension, right? So, you know, most of us, as we're, you know, growing in our careers, we're pretty not confident. There's like this like whole imposter syndrome feel that we have. You know, what were some of the steps that eventually you got more and more confident in what you were able to do? Like, what helped you build that confidence?
Yeah, I wish I knew this like when I was much younger, but I didn't. So I'm grateful that I know it now. Is that, you know, everybody go through it. It's just that it's normal, like having that imposter syndrome. It's normal. Feeling like you're not good enough, feeling like, oh, you know, they're gonna, well, that's also imposter syndrome. Just feeling like you can't, you're not good enough, right? Everybody go through that. So the way I would say is think it. So that's why I'm always a little baffled as to how to get that earlier in your career. But if you can, that's awesome. But the way I did it was to kind of reflect on the success that I did have, right? Like whenever I feel like I'm not confident about something, I kind of go through and think through the process and say, you know what, actually, that's not true. You actually did this and this and this right. So, so I think that really helps. The other thing I would say is having a really good network of friends and family that you're really close to, that you can talk to, because it's a good way to kind of vent and get your thoughts out and test it out before you kind of take it out to the real world, right? Where people may not be as understanding. So one of the things actually is, this is one of the reasons why I stay in touch with MJAA throughout all these years, is I'm really grateful for MJAA. So like I said, I'm a really shy person. So when the opportunity to take on as a chair came up, I immediately said, oh, no, I can't do this because, I'm really shy. I don't like to speak in public. And as soon as I finished saying that, I was like, yeah, I got to do this. And Monty J, MJ mentorship program is the perfect environment because everybody is so friendly and supportive. And this is what's going to get me that practice to be able to get more comfortable. So, and I did it. And I was, it was pretty nerve-wracking. Like every time I got up, I mean, it was worse than this because back then it was, in person. So every session I had to get up and talk to in front of 40, 50 people with the mentees and the mentors. And, it was like about 40, 50 people every session. And I felt like I was like yelling, right? Because my ears are right here, right, right next to like when I'm speaking. So I can hear myself really loud, but people behind way back then couldn't really hear me. So I kind of had to really kind of push myself. So I would really encourage you to do that. Do something scary that you don't feel comfortable doing. If it's public speaking, definitely do it. Take on, a leadership role like chairing the mentorship program or even peer mentor roles in organizing all these different events because it gives you practice. So practice make perfect, and then you have success. And then when you get into this moment where you feel like, oh, I'm not so confident, you can tell yourself, yeah, actually, I'm pretty darn good. I've been able to do all this. right?
So I had a, it's funny. I actually had a very similar experience. So my first experience with Monty Jade was volunteering for the annual conference, and it was a friend. I don't know if you know Alan Wu. He was like a board member or associate of Monty Jade, and he's like a family friend. And he said, "David, you want to volunteer?" And like blindly, and I'm like, "Oh yeah, of course, volunteer, of course. Like for some good cause, of course I'll do it." And he threw me in front, and I ran the annual conference the first time ever as like a volunteer, and I had no idea what the hell a annual conference was. I was leading a team of 30, and I was like, "Oh, okay." And I remember the first day, or the annual conference day, I stood up on stage. There's like 500 people in front. I was like sweating. I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing. My voice is cracking. Oh my goodness. And
I did not notice your voice cracking, by the way, because I was there.
But I mean, like, if you want practice, if you want to get yourself in and get out of your comfort zone without hurting your career, like keep that in mind. We can make a lot of mistakes here in Monty Jade, and it's just fine because it's nonprofit. We're all driven by volunteers, and really, to your point, this practice makes perfect. Oh my goodness. I guarantee I would not be this confident just like in these environments if I didn't have this experience. Like it's pretty night and day. Any other questions from the group? This is your guys' time. I want to make sure you guys get your questions in. I asked quite a bit of questions. No? Oh, you guys are shy.
I think Amber had a question.
Amber, you want to go for a question?
Yeah, so so my background is not in finance or accounting, but this is what I guess I learned from reading news articles and all the new things happened. The most recently is the DeepMind solving the protein fold issue. That's like kind of breakthrough. So it seems like the technology is kind of make a lot of progress, especially into the AI and a lot of the software building. So what's your view on technology's role in finance?
I think there's been a lot of technology in finance, actually. I just think back on when I started about 25 years ago to now. The software system, what is it that we can do? So it's not just even like the ERP system that's been developed, that's been like so much progress, but also everything else outside of it, how we do business, right? So actually, what I would say from a finance perspective is a lot of the technology has enabled a lot more entrepreneurship, right? A lot more smaller organization can have these powerful ERP system that when I first started in my career was kind of more for a more established company. So they've really kind of brought it down, right? One of which is QuickBooks, but not even QuickBooks, but the second tier, third tier accounting system has really kind of revolutionized it. And also the whole SaaS, software as a service, the whole, that opened up a whole new software that you can use for running your business, that that also kind of enable a small company to be able to do a lot of the things that used to be only big company can have the resources to do. So I think all of those kind of combined in, the technology has really revolutionized accounting finance, and probably also automate a lot of things, right, as well. But still need human touch, right? The whole reconciliation bit of it, it's still more of a human touch. So you can automate a lot of the processes, but you still need a human to kind of, make sure that things are the way it should be. So the role is maybe like, I would even say less resources needed to run an accounting department. And now with COVID, what we're proving is a lot of virtual work. So I think there's going to be a lot of, it's going to be interesting when we go back, what that would mean, right?
I see, because there's a lot of doubt saying that a lot of job functions, they will not need human anymore, and everyone has to learn how to code and how to write software.
I wouldn't go so far as that for accounting. It doesn't hurt, but I wouldn't so far as that you need that, but more you do need to be very savvy with technology, right? Like everything we do these days, you know, is technology based. So, so not only do you need to kind of, because mistakes always happen, especially working at a bank. I've realized that because you're pushing through so much volume, right, of transaction, things always go wrong. And when things go wrong, you need human to really be there, because you can't code fast enough to build a program, right, to fix that issue. So human plays a lot of the gap, the bridges between what was and what needs to be. And so until you can build that technology bridge, you're kind of there. So my team, you know, serve a lot of that, especially doing integration from a tiny startup into a huge bank. So, so because of things like that, I think you're always going to need people, but needs differently, right? Not so much in processing things, more of in kind of maintaining and reconciling, because you always need, in accounting finance, you always need things to be reconciled, have a check and balance to make sure that things have happened the way it should. So you still need that, but a lot of things are more easily automated because of the technology.
I see. So it's like the definition of human, that they are able to utilize tools. It's now that the tool has been more advanced and we need to know how it works.
Yes. Yeah, there is definitely that in accounting finance. Yes.
Yeah. Thanks for answering the question.
Oh, sure. Thank you. That was a very, very interesting question. Yeah.
I have a question around how you think about your team and how you think about team development. I know a lot of, especially this like next generation, it's all about, when do I get promoted? When's my next step? Like, how do you manage that dynamic, and what's your kind of philosophy around talent management?
I like playing the supportive role. So I really enjoy mentoring. So I like getting to know my team and say, you tell me where you want to go and let's see how I can help you. I always take that approach, and it has worked well. So recently I had hired this woman, actually, when I was working at another startup, and then she went on to do something else. I left that startup. And so when I was at WePay and she was transitioning roles, so I actually hired her again. So, you know, I've hired her for the second time. And within a year, she was like, you know, I want to do something different. So it was really kind of working with her and kind of understanding what is it that she wanted. She actually wanted to kind of at some point in the future, own her own a CPA firm. So we kind of pathed out as to what that would mean and try to be very supportive in that. I really enjoyed that. I mean, we're still friends. I mean, she no longer works for me, but we're still friends. And I, you know, so I really kind of appreciate that relationship and having that opportunity to kind of impact her in her life. So what I would say is a lot of barriers are broken down because of the technology and because, you know, of all the issues that's been discussed in the last couple of years. They haven't gone away, but it's more open. So I think what I would say is you really need to kind of reflect on where you want to be. And I'm doing the same thing too, right? I'm like, I know that I want to work for, you know, X amount of time. What does that next 5 year looks like? So I would say the same thing to, you know, millennials or Gen Z is, where do you want to go? Path it out, right? Once you know that this is where you want to go. Nowadays, it's so much easier to network. Is if you know somebody who's doing similar to where you want to be, you know, reach out to them via LinkedIn or look at your network, see how they're connected to other people, and ask them for connections. And you go and you do, like, you know, like these informational interviews, find out how they got there, right? You don't have to do everything they did, but it gives you information, right? Information is power. So then you can kind of path yourself to how to get there. So I think a lot of that is much easier nowadays than it was when I first started in my career. So the same advice that I take for myself, I would give it to, you know, folks who are a bit younger than I am and kind of thinking about what they want to do the next step is, where do you want to be? I mean, for me, it was a bit easier being accounting finance because they're a very specific role. So I knew that when I was an auditor, I wanted to be, you know, I wanted to be in corporate accounting and like general accountant. And then when I became a general accountant, I was like, I want to be accounting manager. Then I want to be controller. So that's really easy. Maybe in your field, it may not be as easy as that, but kind of think about it from that perspective, right? So then you have very specific requirements that you need to establish to get there.
So I know a lot of like, well, especially like I think in this generation where organizations have gotten significantly flatter as opposed to like hierarchical. Companies don't have as like prescribed paths anymore. It's kind of like you got to figure it out yourself. I'm really curious about like, you know, how would you give someone advice on how do you find conviction in where you want to go? You know, like it's almost like if I have too many options, that's like, it's like I'm always in analysis paralysis. Well, maybe this way, or maybe this way, or maybe I could do this. I could also do that. Like, how do you help people narrow down that focus?
That is a really good question, David. I
haven't solved it. That's what I'm trying to ask you.
Yeah, because you can think about it from many different levels. I mean, I can tell you how I did it, right? But it may not work for you. It's just, like I said, I was very, very practical. I knew that when I finished college, I needed to have a career, or I needed to either go to grad school or get a job, right? I went to grad school right after that. And it's like, if I'm going to go to grad school, I need to go to grad school so that after that I can get a job. So I was very, very focused. And the reason I was very focused was financially, I had a need for it, right? I had a lot of student debt to pay back, and I'm the youngest of 5 kids. So, you know, by the time I went off to college, you know, I kind of had to be very independent, and I worked throughout college, and I had student loans. So I'm like, I know that I need to get a job. So I think that for me kind of pare down a lot of what you were talking about, options, right? So I was really interested in psychology, for example, when I was in undergraduate. I took a ton of psychology courses, but I couldn't see myself as being a psychologist, mainly because I'm like, I don't want to deal with all these other problems. I'm kind of selfish. I don't want to deal with people problems. I already have enough of my own. So I'm like, that was really great interest for me, but I knew that that was not a profession for me. So then I kind of pared it down to what am I good at and what can I get paid, you know, to doing what I'm good at, right? So, and like I said, that kind of led me to how I got to where I am. But that shouldn't restrain you, you know? I mean, I have met I've had at least a couple of people came up and told me, said, oh my gosh, you're a controller? You're not like my company controller. I'm like, I'll take that as a compliment. So I have met accountants who are very, very kind of like strict, you know, and I'm not like that. I mean, like even in the world of accounting where there's like very black and white, I see a lot of gray, right? So you kind of have to train yourself to kind of think that way. I mean, I would never do anything that is, you know, wrong, right? Like I wouldn't, you know, do a financial statement where there's a loss and say there's actually a profit. Like you won't do that. That's just wrong. But there is a lot of gray in how you interpret stuff, and finding that and finding kind of where you're comfortable with, right, within the restriction you have. So for me, restrictions aren't necessarily a bad thing. They're kind of there to kind of guide you, because otherwise you have way too many choices. And like you said, David, it becomes, you know, analysis paralysis. Like, how do you get started? Right. So I think that's also why I have a nonprofit that I founded, because I did have an interest in it. And I did want to do something, but I knew that every day when I work on nonprofit, I'm so happy that I don't need this to make a living, that I don't need this, you know, to put food on the table for my family. So I very much appreciate my job that, you know, pays me. Right.
Definitely. I think it feels very, very different when we're actually doing something we're very, very passionate about, we're very excited about. I remember many years ago, this is like a decade ago plus now, I actually went to culinary school. And so I actually did culinary school after work hours. So this was a 6 p.m. class to midnight, Monday through Wednesdays. And so, but then I would get home at like 1 a.m. and then I'd need to wake up early for work. But it felt amazing because it was like I was doing something fun. It was super exciting. And it's just, it's finding your passion really, really makes a big difference, I think.
Yeah. But you probably don't want to be a chef.
No. I didn't I was like people were asking like, oh, do you want to be a chef? Do you want to start a restaurant? I'm like, no way. Like it won't make me any money whatsoever. I just like cooking.
Yeah. And you want to cook when you want to cook, right?
That's exactly right. I don't want it as a job. Like once it becomes a job, it's just no fun anymore at that point.
Yeah, very cool.
Any other questions for Rebecca?
Yeah, I got a question here.
Yeah, go for it, Max.
Rebecca, thank you for your time to
Sure.
chat with us today. So
Sure.
I also worked at Deloitte before. So I'm wondering that as a financial team, so if sometimes other team like sales team or operation team, probably they will have different opinion with us. So how should we communicate with them? For example, in our financial forecasting model, we have certain numbers, but sales team probably they don't agree with that. But we think our numbers are more correct. So in this situation, how do you communicate with them?
So I have had similar issues where salespeople tell me what accounting rules are, right, for revenue recognition, because salespeople are like, you know, they want to recognize revenue. They just want to make sure that they're going to get their commission. So they're like, if it's because of, you know, I have to recognize this much revenue, I want that. And they're like trying to tell me how to interpret revenue recognition rules. But the accounting rules are accounting rules, and that's my expertise. So the approach that I've taken in the past, and I do it on a daily basis at work, is just take it as an opportunity for me to kind of share my knowledge with people. Then that kind of break down a lot of the personality, right? That you're right, I'm right. It's more of like I come in with an open-mindedness, and I would use phrase like, you know, from my perspective, this is how we got to here because of X, Y, and Z. So it really kind of gets you to show that you share your thought process with them, and give you an opportunity to show that you are actually an expert in this field, right? Because of X, Y, and Z. And also it kind of helps you to slow down. So then you're not as defensive anymore. You're more of like, I'm here to work together and collaborate and get to the right answer. So I'm going to, you know, share my knowledge with you. So I think that tends to help a lot. And plus, if the other guy is really like being more forceful, he just looks like a bigger jerk, right? So, and also, I'm surprised that none of the women asked me this, being an Asian woman, you know, I have found that I have to be very careful as to how I come off. And I don't know if careful is the right word, but I'm pretty mindful as to how I come off, because I had this one incident where I was reporting to a Caucasian male, and I'm talking to him, and I'm like, you know, trying to express my thoughts, and he just couldn't understand me. He's a really great guy. So finally, after like 5 minutes of it, he finally got what I was saying. And so then he said, Rebecca, why didn't you just tell me? I'm like, I did. Because if I told you any other way, right, you would think I'm a bitch, I'm a so-and-so, and our discussion, like our relationship would be in jeopardy. And when I told him that, and like I said, he was a really good guy, he kind of like sat back and thought about it. He's like, I see it, right? So all that is just to say that I'm not a white male, so I can't communicate like a white male. I can't come to you and be a little bit rough around the edges, because people get turned off when, especially Asian women are, you know, rough. They call you dragon lady, they call you whatever. So because of that, I really kind of had to come up with an approach where people will take me seriously, because I do know what I'm talking about. So I may have to do a bit of prep work in how I want to come off and how I'm going to explain something, and kind of also give, you know, sometimes you can't win all your battles, so you kind of have to pick and choose. But at the same time, really kind of stay on that professional path. So then if the other person's not professional or being more aggressive, then it becomes even more, you know, apparent. So that would be my advice.
Yep, that's great. Thank you for your advice.
Sure.
Max, just to kind of add to that, Max, like usually some transparency about incentive structures is also important too. So for example, let's say if you're on the FP&A side, you're evaluated on accuracy, for example, right? So like you need to know the reasons why, like accuracy of forecast is kind of where you're metriced at. Sales guys, they're metriced at blowing out their targets, right? So their whole goal is to sandbag it really low, so they always shoot above it. And so like having that kind of like open conversation, like I understand you're trying to hit your goals, but I also need to hit my goals. We need to kind of come to a midpoint. But I think being transparent with a lot of those things helps flush things out faster.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Transparency. Yeah.
Yep.
Also, it kind of set an agenda to how you're going to talk about some things, right? Say, hey, I'm really transparent. And when you say you're really transparent, people can't really argue with you on that, right?
I like setting frameworks. Like if I'm working between groups, like let's not worried about the specific tactic, like the goal number. Let's talk about how do we come to this objective, right? Yeah. I think coming with a framework and let's debate the framework as opposed to debate the specific topic. Usually that disarms people a little bit more. Is kind of my thoughts, Max.
Yeah.
Rebecca, I want to hit up more on the Asian female component because, as an Asian male, I have issues, for example, in different ecosystems, but I think as an Asian female, you're faced very, very different challenges that I can't comprehend, right? Just because I'm not female, but love to kind of have your thoughts more on some of the challenges that you face kind of moving up the corporate ladder or within, other organizations as an Asian female. I know you brought up one really good one, but are there any other examples or any ideas for other people?
Well, these days people talk a lot about being authentic, right? So one of the things I kind of really had to think about was, what does that mean to me? And how is it that I'm going to share and come across as being authentic? So a lot of it is, fortunately or unfortunately, for women, I think if you have family, it kind of helps because it kind of makes other people feel like, you're more like they understand you. So, and I have also been in a situation when I bring up family, I was kind of, it kind of hurt my chances. Like, for example, you're not supposed to do this, but when you go for an interview, they ask you whether you have kids or whatever. So I actually my interview was going really well. And, the CFO was talking about like the next step of how, and we went out to lunch and we were like hitting it off really well. And then all of a sudden he asked me casually if I had any children. And I was like, yeah, I had kids, right? He has kids. So I'm like, I have kids. Before you know it, I didn't get a call back. It could be something else, but I was like, I wonder if that has anything to do with it, right? It was also a startup company. So there can be cases where, revealing that you have a family, whatever, could hurt your chances. But also I find that for me, it kind of make people feel like I'm a real person. Like when I also do talk about like who I am as a person, that I'm a mom and all that. So I think for me, all of that kind of comes back down to relatability, right? Can people relate to you? And as an Asian woman, I think it's very important for people to kind of see you as a person and try different ways to be relatable. So then this also reminds me of one of the mentors we had. This was a number of years ago. This was a year when I was a mentee. And I remember her saying that, she got into baseball because there was always sports discussions and she felt like she was being left out. And so she wanted to be part of that discussion. So she actually had to learn about baseball and so that she can be part of the discussion. So sometimes doing things like that so that you can be part of a group, right? I didn't, because I still don't like baseball. I like going to the games for the hot dogs and socialization, but I still don't really like the game. But having said that, we have the first general manager of a major baseball team who's an Asian woman, and I was just totally floored. I was like, how do you get there? Right? It just seems so like, wow, that's great.
I think this idea of like connecting with coworkers is super important, like just being more authentic. I remember my mentor when I first joined the mentorship program was Larry Chang. And what he would actually always stress is, he used to hold dinner parties at his house.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
And I thought it was really interesting because this might be a stereotype, but I always found that Asians were less likely to actually invite their coworkers to their house. And it's really interesting kind of like psychology behind it, because it's like I'm opening up something that's very private, right? And like inviting you over to my house. But so I try to still do that. Like a lot of my coworkers, my team, I always invite them and do backyard barbecues and stuff like that. So I think it's an important way to bridge that.
Yeah. You bring up a really good point, because sometimes, like I said, I'm a very shy person. So that's not the most intuitive thing to do, right? But it really is needed, because otherwise, how would they know who you are?
Definitely. Karina, you want to ask your question?
Yep, it's me again. So everybody is, I think we always say as Asian female, you get a lot of disadvantage. But are there any advantages?
Are there any advantages?
I would say first, because as an Asian female, I used to work in China. I feel it's very, because I work with a lot of foreigners. They are from Australia, from New Zealand, from US, from UK. But well, the good thing is they don't know much about China, so they have a lot of difficulties there. So I feel no matter what I did for them, they really appreciate what I did, and the communication for work is way much smoother than I can. You know, when I push something, I really think it helps me a lot. I don't know whether because I helped them or because I'm Asian female or whatever, but I feel that's a benefit. I don't know what we get here in the US.
Yeah, I mean, there's, you know, Asians are kind of looked upon as model minority, right? That we're good at math and science, and so being an accountant who's Asian, it's kind of like, oh yeah, that makes sense because she likes math, and you know, she's probably her balance sheet and P&L are probably right because, you know, she's good at math. So I mean, yeah, things like that, right? So and they know that we work hard, so you don't kind of have to like go and say, you know, prove that, hey, you know, you work hard, because they already kind of assume that you do. I don't necessarily know if that's a good thing, but you know, there are those stereotypes. So I guess what I would say is with any stereotype, there's good and bad, and you kind of have to kind of understand it and play up the good and, you know, kind of surprise them when there's a bad. I mean, the bad things are that they don't expect you to speak up, right? They don't, so it's hard when you need to have, sometimes you can't avoid it, you have to have confrontation, right? So when you do have confrontation, people get really like, ooh, you get a little bit more harshly treated. Like, for example, I've had to let go of my employees, right? And I think and I didn't really notice this until I kind of went through it, that it was tougher on me than like if I were a white man kind of firing someone, because there's always that, like when you get rid of somebody in your team that's not performing, not everybody knows everything about them, right? So there's always that like, oh, she's just showing off her power, she's just flexing this and that. Whereas if I were white male, those things, like even if they were there, it doesn't matter, right? I could be a jerk and you'll still follow my lead. But I feel like, you know, as a woman, if you're kind of if they think you're a jerk, you have a lot more negative repercussions. So kind of like knowing that, you know, I kind of have learned to play up certain things and play down certain things, right?
Do you think aggressive is a bad thing?
I don't think it's a bad thing. I just think that, because to be honest with you, I wouldn't be where I am if I'm not assertive, right? I like to use the word assertive more than aggressive. I'm a bit tone deaf to the word no, meaning that if you tell me no, I'm be like, okay, I'll come back to you, right? Maybe phrase this differently, making sure that, you know, it's not a no. And I tell this to my kids, because if I accepted every no that I got, I wouldn't be here. So you do have to be assertive. You do have to have that perseverance and all that stuff. Those are all good. But all I'm saying is you can't, whereas macho might work for a guy, macho doesn't look good on a woman. So that's all I'm saying, right? So you, like, knowing that, you kind of have to like realize that what will work for me, because at the end of the day, you know, as a manager, you just really want to get your job done, right? Your team has certain goals and they need to accomplish it. You need to influence them to get the work done. So if you say it a certain way and it upset them, then, you know, I learn. I don't say it that way. I say it a different way. I may have to say it in a sweeter way than I will, right? But to certain people that doesn't work, and then you learn that you have to kind of pivot. So the biggest thing thing is to be kind of flexible, kind of like learn to listen and be flexible, is to kind of watch what reaction you're getting, right? Does that help?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I feel I get a lot of questions.
It's okay.
Keep going, go for it.
I hope this is my last, but I'm probably some people here know that I'm new in America. So when I was back work in China, in Shenzhen, it's very fast speed. So I kind of like, when I start work, I feel myself all change. I'm very, I would think I'm aggressive, because here people, they are very what's the word? They are relaxing at work, my feeling. So a lot of things to me, it's very urgent, but they kind of like, oh, I need time. I just take my time. So I'm trying everything to push them. So at the beginning, I was kind of like so stressed, because people, they are so slow, and I couldn't get used to it. And I talked to my mentor in the company. He was kind of say, oh, he recommended a book called Influencer to me, but I know it must be how it works here. I really don't know how to. I'm trying to finish the book, but the thing is, I still don't say how to influence people. If you don't, I don't know. I really don't know how.
So I heard a couple of things. So if you wouldn't mind, I wanted to kind of comment on them. One is, I think it's great. I love having, people who are on my team who are very like diligent and very assertive, meaning that they won't let go of a task until it's done. I love people like that. But at the same time, they do rub people the wrong way, right? And what I would say is kind of listen to them and try to modulate, right? First of all, before I even say that, first of all, you are who you are. You can't change yourself, right? You can, but only to a certain extent, right? So be true to yourself. If you're that type of person that says, you know what, I'm a very task oriented. I just need to get X, Y, and Z done, and then I feel good. That's who you are, right? But you may want to take an approach of like, okay, that's your bigger goal. But if you keep on like upsetting people along the way, you're not going to get what you want. So what is it that you're going to do to not upset them? Right? So meaning that some people are just really slow. Well, then you may need to kind of give them a little bit more time, right? Warn them a little bit more before your deadline. So I always pad days before I actually need something drop dead. So I may say, hey, I need this by Monday instead of Wednesday, right? Because it's due on Thursday. So then because you know that they're slow, you kind of like now have a little bit of a window. I've told you I need it on Monday. You haven't given it to me. Now it's Tuesday. So now I have a right to come back and ask you. So kind of like use that type of tricks to kind of make it look like you're giving them time, but you're also just needing to get the work done. So I think that's why the network and which is really tough nowadays, because we're all on Zoom, helps, because then people can understand your tone and they can see your physical, like your face, your manner. So then they know that you're not just like there to just say chop, 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 but you're like, I'm very serious. However, I'm willing to work with you on it, right? So using that type of little touches, I think will kind of tone down maybe that seriousness, but at the same time, you can still get your work done, right? So that would be my suggestions. Does that help?
Sure, thank you.
Okay.
I wanted to touch a little bit upon this. I know you covered a little bit on this Asian female and kind of like the strengths of an Asian female, right? So I kind of wanted to answer that, but just more in an Asian context. So obviously I'm not an Asian female, but I think there's a beauty of coming from an Asian culture, and there's also beauty in coming from a Western culture. I think the way I kind of think about it is that there's no perfect cultural background or perfect personality type. It's we all have our unique backgrounds, but I think what's most important is that we need to understand one another's cultures, right? So like this idea that in the US, the primary game that we play here is chess. And in Asia, the primary game that was played there is Go, right? Weiqi. So in these two different worlds, the strategy for chess is to dominate the center. If you dominate the center, you will win the game. In Go, it's all about surrounding slowly from the outsides and coming towards the center. So when we think about this from a societal standpoint and a philosophical standpoint, the two societies actually approach problems very differently.
Yeah.
And I think it's really just understanding that dynamic allows us to be better suited to be able to influence both other sides. And for me, I think an interesting part about being an ABC is that, you know, when people look at me, they're like, oh, you're Asian. So all of a sudden I'm kind of like excluded from like the Caucasian circle. Not to say that I am, but like, just like really quickly when they look at you like, oh, you're Asian. But if I go to Asia, if I go to China, they're like, oh, you're not one of us. You look like an American. So I'm in this weird spot where like, I'm not really East, I'm not really West, because both sides like don't really truly accept me, right? Because I'm always an outsider. So for me, I'm okay. I'm going to be the middle. I'm going to be right in the middle. I can understand Eastern culture. I can understand Western culture both well enough to help bridge that communication. Because ultimately, when we're in a workplace or any environment, it's all about communication. If I can make a personal touch or if I can influence other people, I can get a lot of things done. But if I'm too fixed-minded and I'm unwilling to change my ways, it's going to hurt me. So it's modulating to your environment. I think it's really important.
Yeah, that's a really good point, David. I think so. Kind of the way I think about it is when you listen to people, right? The very fact that you have these multicultural gives you more knowledge, right? So then just to kind of play one up when that's more appropriate and play the other side up when that's more appropriate, but you have more flexibility.
Yeah. Well, it's like this idea.
So I would say,
yeah, I think like, I mean, like this is true with not like, let's exclude culture as a dynamic, right? So let's take a dimension of seniority. So someone that's first year working versus someone that's about to retire, I'm going to communicate with them very differently. Someone that's in finance versus engineering versus sales, again, I'm going to communicate with them very differently. Someone that's in a software world versus a hardware world versus an entertainment world or a sporting world, I'm going to communicate with them differently. I cannot take a fixed mindset to everyone. And so the strength of knowing more people and having diversity of different like people with backgrounds is you can now modulate how you communicate to different people to drive the best efficacy of communication. But that's a skill set that we all pick up over time. It's not like I know it immediately, right?
Yeah, but it also is you get better with the more you do it, right? So that's why I think networking and having those events is really helpful. It's not just about, when I go to this event, will I get my next job? I think sometimes people think that, but it really is for me, like when I go to a networking event and I meet interesting people, that was like, oh, that was a real win, but no real, direct result to my bottom line at the moment, but it does kind of build up that war chest that David was talking about.
Definitely. Well, Rebecca, I want to give you a last couple words. Maybe if you could give us some words of wisdom or some takeaways, like what should we be thinking as a mentorship community about our future?
I really like the sense of building a community, kind of all of us kind of coming together and supporting each other, giving back, paying forward. So I really like that, and I would encourage you to kind of have interests outside of your work. And to be able to do whatever you're passionate about. That's what my passion is. So I kind of do a lot of that. But also it really helps your career because it kind of helps you like have a better focus when you actually do come back to doing work. So I find that it's definitely true with me is that once I kind of work on, my nonprofit for a few hours and then I come back to it, I'm a lot more appreciative. One of which is that, hey, this is what's getting me the resources to be able to do that. So that's why I think it's really important to have that diverse, set of experiences. So I definitely encourage that. And also that through those kind of like what you talked about your cooking class is that that's a good way to find your passion. I especially want to communicate that to young people as they're starting their career because they think that they have to go and get a job and career is something they're really passionate about. It's like yes and no, like, sometimes you don't want to cook and make your living cooking because that's too stressful, right? It's like you want to cook what you want to cook. So your passion may be that, but you want to just kind of leave it as a hobby. So then you need to find something else that kind of, bring in a paycheck, right? And it's okay. It's okay to have that two different worlds. Okay.
Well, Rebecca, thank you so much. Really appreciate you spending the time with us and just sharing your thoughts and sharing your wisdom. We really appreciate you coming out. Like, we wouldn't be here without your support. So thank you again so much for coming out and volunteering.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm going to close out with a little bit of logistics. Let's see. Here we go. Share my screen. So we have a couple of other events coming down the line. We have workshop number three coming out, which is Building Personal Brand with Caroline Lee. We've got a happy hour on the 18th. If you guys want to meet other people, please come out. We're going to invite some more of our board members out to come to that event as well. We got a full stack of events coming out into the new year. So storytelling with Chris Ye, he's a great author, put up together a really great book, and you can look at this list as well. So all of our new events are all publicly listed on our website. So if you have any comments or questions, feel free to go check it out there. And if you need any of more information, you can always reach out to either Ryan or myself. Lastly, I want to thank our sponsors, Deloitte, Venture Pacific Law, UMC, Silicon Motion, New York Life, Most, and Richwave. We wouldn't be here without their financial support as well. We really thank them for continuing to support us through COVID. And this will conclude our event. Thank you guys so much for coming out tonight. Thank you, Rebecca, for coming out and supporting us. I'm really looking forward to seeing you, hopefully in person, when this whole COVID thing is done.
2021.
21. All right, everyone, have a great weekend. We will see you soon.
Bye-bye. Happy holidays.